Good evening, and thank you for joining the Voices Many podcast. This afternoon, we have the privilege of having a special guest with us. He's not just your everyday guest, he is also a caster himself. His name is Erik DaRosa. He's known to a lot of his friends and clients as the Yoda. He's an inspirational speaker. He is a founder and co-host of Survivor to Thriver podcast. And he's not just doing this alone. He has his co-host, who is Marc Fernandes. They have found a way to embrace and to educate those that listen and follow him, and we're asking you to do the same on mental health, bringing topics to the kitchen table to help educate us, help embrace us, help prepare us for different mental situations that if we're not going through personally, a loved one may be experiencing as well. And the more we are educated, well-rounded, the better we are people who are able to also help not just ourselves, but others. Welcome to the mic with us, Mr. Erik DaRosa. How you doing?
Yolanda, Vanessa, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm really excited and honored to be on your show today, especially given that it's May and it's Mental Health Awareness Month, which
Yes.
is a month that's always been some very important to me. I know it's very important to our audience and our listeners, and I'm hoping that your audience will find it just as inspiring as well.
Yes, definitely. Very important topic that we're going to be covering. And I want our listeners to know that Erik is going to share his information a little bit later as far as his story on mental illness, how you can listen in and follow them and get that weekly information. I want to put that out there first. But we're going to be covering together the importance of mental health in the conversations. A lot of times we experience and we hear of mental health issues and illnesses, but we don't know how to talk about them and to get to the bare root of what's really going on in a person's life. So, Erik, why did you decide to start a mental health podcast?
It's such a great question. And before I answer it, I want to applaud you for using the term mental illness, because so much of what we are trying to do is shatter the stigma around having mental health conversations. And one of the big stigmas is using the word mental illness, right? In general, people often want to shy away from that. And there's so many taboos and stigmas around that word. So thank you very much for using that. Why did I decide to start a podcast? I think the answer is simple and complex at the same time. The simple answer is to help people. I've been on my own decades long mental health journey from the time I was 7 years old. It's the earliest that I could remember. I'm now 50. And throughout that time, I had battled obsessive compulsive disorder. And we can get into different pieces and parts of that if you'd like. But both the typical manifestations, the physical manifestations of that, but also intrusive thoughts, which can often be very terrifying. And that led to an endless loop of OCD and anxiety. I lived with that through my middle school years, my high school years, into college, always keeping it silent, never speaking about it, always trying to keep up a facade. I didn't want people to think that there was something wrong with me or something different about me. And so what better place for somebody with anxiety and OCD to end up than in the financial sector in New York City, where I spent almost 2 decades and watched my mental health continue to deteriorate until I had suffered from 2 different dissociative episodes, psychotic breaks, the first in 2004 and the second in 2006. And it was at that point, with the urging of my wife that I sought help from a psychiatrist. And
Mhm.
so the real hard work of my mental health journey at that point began. And so fast forward to January of 2021, and we're in the height of COVID. Things in the mountains where I live here in Colorado, the ski season was starting to look very strange. We had ended abruptly in March of 2020. And I had just gotten back from a vacation with my wife and felt like I was in my own funk. And I thought to myself, if I have the tools and if I have the resources and I know how to be able to manage my mental health issues, I can only imagine what's happening with other people out there. And that was kind of where the podcast was born. And my co-host Mark, he and I grew up about 7 miles away from each other as kids, never knew each other. We lived in Boston at the same time. We lived in New York at the same time. It took until my wife and I moved to Colorado 11 years ago to meet each other. And he and I have been very close friends ever since, and have been very open about sharing our mental health journeys together. And what we really wanted to do is we wanted to bring back, as I was mentioning on the pre-call, this idea of having kitchen table conversations. We knew we wanted to destigmatize and without desensitizing the issue of mental health. And we really wanted to shatter the stigma around having mental health conversations. And we felt the best way to be able to do that was through the podcast medium, especially during COVID. So many people were listening to podcasts. And so we thought that was the most effective way to get our message out. And so here we are, 18 months in. We talk about we're upending the front end of the mental health space, and the podcast itself. What we're really trying to do through a storytelling platform is each week have real and relatable people come on, share their stories. But most importantly, share their story of hope and light and what they've done to go from surviving with whatever mental illness, addiction issue, trauma issue it is, and what they did and the steps they took to become thrivers. And so in some ways, we also see ourselves as that bridge between getting the conversation started and having and helping our audience to, one, know they're not alone, but also kind of unlock the door to all the amazing resources that are available to them at the end of the day that they may not know even exist.
It's true. It's very true. It's great.
So what is it meant by a non-binary, a non-linear healing journey? Where does that start, and what is it meant by that? How do you define it?
I love that question, Vanessa. So for me, when I talk about a healing journey, and part of this has come out of me kind of discovering it for myself, but a lot of it has come from conversations I've had with other people. And it's this whole idea that our journeys of healing, I started using the word nonlinear, and I started over the past few months hearing that used a lot. And so what I often like to do, being married to a writer, is I like to kind of think of other types of analogies. And so I've started even speaking differently about that. And now I call it, that a healing journey is fluid. And I think it gives a really good description of it's fluid. It's like a river. It's ever changing. It's morphing. It has twists and turns. I think what happens for those of us that suffer from mental illness is at first, when we seek help and we seek treatment, we want a very quick fix. And just like if we go to a doctor for a physical ailment, let's say, I'm going to use a ski analogy here. Let's say I'm skiing and I break my leg. Well, I know if I go to the doctor, I'll probably have it surgically repaired. I'll be in a cast for 6 to 8 weeks. Then I'll do physical therapy and the leg will be as strong as it ever was. And hopefully I never break it again. And that's the last I need to talk about it. And I think many times when it comes to our mental health journeys, when people start on those journeys, they think in the very same way that if I start to see a therapist, or I start to see a psychiatrist, or if I start to see an Eastern medicine healer, once I begin that process, everything's going to be better.
Mhm.
All my issues will go away, and I can continue to live a very happy and fulfilled life without ever having to think about those issues again. And I think it often leads to frustration for a lot of people. It led to a lot of frustration for me when I would do the hard work, and then I would have setbacks, and then I do the hard work again, and then longer periods of time would go, but then I'd have the setback. And that's when I started thinking, well, why is this always happening to me? Why, a little bit of that victim mentality. And the more I started to speak with people, it became very clear that the healing journey is exactly that. It's a journey. We talk a lot on the podcast, comparing it to kind of Lord of the Rings, except Frodo doesn't find the ring. The ring is out there, but you never find it. It's very similar with a mental health journey. And that's where kind of the nonlinear or fluid thing has come from. And one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever gotten, I had a major setback this past fall, and I wasn't here in Colorado. I was, probably a 7-hour flight away. And I remember calling my therapist, having woken up from a panic attack in the middle of the night. And I called her that next morning, and I said, I can't believe this is happening again. It had been so long for me since I had had that type of an episode. And I remember her words, and I won't forget them. And she said, you should be thanking your brain, because it's your brain's way of telling you that you're ready to take the next step on your journey, and you're ready to do some of the more deeper and harder healing work for your trauma. And I think from that point on, I've looked at it in a completely different way than I had before.
Wow. And so with that taking place, how important is our community in helping with that healing? Because not only were you away from home, you were in a different surrounding. So how important is it with having that community support and
So
being
community, I love that, Yolanda. Thank you. Community is everything. And I'll talk about community generally, but I'll also talk about what actually happened within a different community for me when that experience happened back in the end of October. Community is so important, and it, for many of us, and I'm sure there are people in your audience today who may be hearing my story thinking, oh wow, that kind of sounds like me, but aren't yet ready to speak with their own voice, like I wasn't for so very long. Finding community and finding comfort and a safe space among other people who are experiencing not the same, but maybe something similar to what you're experiencing, makes such an incredible difference. And we talk a lot on our show about the idea of vulnerability. And I think the first step in being able to take a step into that community is to find people that you trust, find people that you want to speak to about this, and then being vulnerable with those people and show, so many people, especially when it comes to male mental health, vulnerability, right? It's another stigma. There's so many stigmas within this. It's almost like a Russian doll, right? You take one, head off and there's another doll buried in there. Men are always taught, boys don't cry, and, vulnerability is a weakness, and you have to solve your own problems and toughen up. And so when you find that community of people that you can share your story with, it's so super powerful and it's so healing. One of my friends who's been a guest on the podcast, who lives back in Massachusetts, and he and I are speaking on a panel together next week. He talks about the fact that finding community actually saved his life. Without without having found a community of other people that he could heal with, he's not sure where he would be to this day. And you asked about, community and that experience that I had in the Pacific Ocean, on one of those islands that are out there. I'll let your audience guess where it is. It's part of the United States. And it's somewhere that my wife and I love to spend a lot of our time in the off season, when we're not skiing or crazy with work. And over time, we've gotten to know a lot of the people on the island very well. We've made lots of friends, and especially as the podcast came out, I spoke more and more to them about my own story and my own experience, and so they were aware. And we've shared a lot, and so I was there. I was going to stay an extra week to hang out with some friends on Maui. I'll give it away, and things were going okay for the first 2 or 3 days. And I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, had a panic attack, thought, oh gosh, 7-hour flight. There's nothing leaving here until, tomorrow night. Who am I going to turn to? Where's my support team? Why is this happening? I can't believe it's been, I think it was 15 years since I've had a similar experience. And so after speaking to my therapist, changing flights, making preparations to fly home that evening, I made the conscious decision to approach a whole bunch of my friends who actually work at the hotel that we stay at, and some other friends who are on the island. And I told them the story. I told them exactly what was happening with me, why I needed to leave in such a hurry. And the outpouring of love and support from all of them was tremendous. And it really made me realize that you can have community in family, you can have community in faith, you can have community where you live, but that showed me that I can have a community 7 hours away, with a whole different group of people who I know had my back, and they were so instrumental in supporting me, and making sure that I was able to get through that day, that I got to the airport, got on the plane, and was able to fly home. And I'm just so grateful for having people like that in my life.
And they probably saved your life, actually, keeping you calm, allowing you to express and to say what was really going on deep down inside of you. That's what we need, is to be able to have those ears to hear, and to have that heart and so willing to have it open from others so that they can embrace us in our time of need. That's so very important.
And what you just said, I think, Yolanda, is so important. It's the word, listen, and listening with our ears. And we talk a lot about on our show the importance of listening and listening without judgment. I think when it comes to mental health, people are eager to listen, but people are also very eager to want to help problem solve. And so many times when we're in crisis, we just want an ear to listen.
Sure.
I don't want somebody to try to solve it for me. Professionals will work with me through that. I just want to be able to talk to somebody, to be able to get that off of my shoulders, helps so tremendously. And knowing it's somebody that I trust, and knowing that it's somebody who isn't going to pass judgment, is so very important. And I think that's such a key in helping to shatter the stigma and make people feel more and more comfortable about having these conversations, is knowing that there are open ears on the other side who maybe they can share in the experience, they're empathetic, but they just want to be there for their friends or their family or their loved ones.
Yeah, because whenever you're being very vulnerable, no matter what the situation is, especially if it's an addiction or abuse or mental illness, you being vulnerable is a very scary place. And if no one's wanting to listen or hear you and you get turned away, it makes all of the anxiety and everything else build up even worse than what it was before. Because now you're in a place of no one wants to hear me. But if someone's willing to take that second to hear your story, it means so much more. And it actually can help you go through it. And having, that healing team as your backup means so much.
You're so right, Vanessa. And as I said to you both before the show started, I often think through things, both on my own show, but also when I'm talking to amazing podcast hosts such as yourself. And as you were just talking about that vulnerability piece, something brand new just popped into my head in terms of kind of a metaphor for people who may have not had experience, either being the person who's going through the experience or the person who's on the other end listening. And to me, I think a good metaphor is for somebody suffering and in crisis. It's not the same, but it can be a similar type of a feeling. When you're, let's say you're in high school, and there's that one person that you want to ask out. You want to ask them to the dance. Mm-hmm. And the nerves and the butterflies. And so, for somebody that's going through a crisis, you already, right, your sensory system is in overdrive. Mm-hmm. But when you're ready to talk to somebody about it, you kind of get that momentary feeling of, oh, I'm about to tell the world like what's going to happen. And when somebody listens with open ears and allows mm-hmm. you to be vulnerable, so much of that, right, what we experienced back in high school, asking somebody to a dance or on a date, when they say yes, it's mm-hmm. suddenly that sense of relief. And that's, I think, a really good way for people to think about it is what we're really looking for is by being able to share our story in a time of need. We're really just looking to be able to calm ourselves and to soothe ourselves till we can feel ready to seek out, medical help, professional help of whatever it might be.
That's true. That's real good analogy that you gave of that. And also too, we were also talking before how doing podcasting, how you can go into those waves of burnout. Mm-hmm. And when you were talking, it helped me to realize too, whenever we're going through those stages of burnout, those periods, it's also our mind saying, hey, I need a break. Because mm-hmm. if you continue to push through those times, you'll go into a burnout to where sometimes you can't recover, to where it leads you like, and I've heard other podcasters say, I just can't do this. And I just have to walk away. And being able to listen and obey to what your brain is telling you, what your body is telling you, is so important. And you have to realize that we have limitations. Being able to recognize our limitations are very important. And remember, just because you're not going through it, because you're not there at that point in time, doesn't mean that it can't happen to you. And that's why it's so important to listen, to have that compassion that's needed, to be able to help someone to heal, to be able to get through that process. So thank you.
Yeah. Oh, my pleasure. And you put it in such a great way because the brain itself is such a powerful muscle. Mm-hmm. It's just like any other muscle in the body. We can go to the gym, we can bike, we can run. But if we do anything to excess, at some point, our physical body, our somatic system is going to tell us, you need a day off, or you need a week off. Like And we often, unfortunately, don't treat our brains the same way, and we push them and we push them and we push them. But our brains are these amazing mechanisms, and they do send out signals to us, sometimes in ways that we're not prepared for, and sometimes in ways which are rather unpleasant. But it's the brain's way of, it's almost like doing a hard reboot on a computer. It just can't take anymore, and it needs to, it needs to quiet down. And that's where the importance of self-care comes in, and caring for your physical body as well as your cognitive body.
That's true. That's true. Right.
How can our listeners and watchers find out more about you and Marc and your podcast?
Sure. So we are on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, all of the major podcast platforms. We are called From Survivor to Thriver, and we release new episodes every Tuesday morning. Our entire back catalog is there, and our episodes are set up in such a way that if you go into our show notes, we've written our show notes with a description about what each individual guest might be going through. So if somebody's interested in hearing more about OCD, or if somebody's interested in hearing about postpartum depression, they can go back and they can find out those episodes right away. Another really fun thing, and I haven't even said this on the air before, but each of the titles of our podcasts come from something very inspirational, or that Marc and I find inspirational, that our guest says during the podcast. And so now I'm thinking many of the guests that have been on our show are going to go back and start having heard this show, thought, oh wow, I don't remember saying that. So that's where we come up with those. We are on Facebook. We have a Facebook page called From Survivor to Thriver. We are on Instagram, so you can find us under @Brush Creek Thrivers. We are actually on TikTok. So we've been on TikTok now for about a month and a half, still trying to figure out how that platform works, being in the age demographic I am. But we are From Survivor to Thriver. And if any of your guests want to find me personally on Instagram, I am Ski Sherpa, SKISHERPA, and they can find me on Facebook, just an easy search of my first and last name. I always love hearing from people about their own journeys, and I always find inspiration in meeting new people. So I welcome your audience to check us out and to drop us a note and let us know what you think.
It's been great having you, and just being able to have the pre-talk and everything is really great. I have to tell those that are listening, those that are watching, please follow this guy. I mean, can't ask for anything more. I mean, I know a lot of times we hit on mental illnesses, different things that people are experiencing, but to have a encyclopedia of knowledge, a wealth of knowledge, Erik and Marc, they have it all right there for you. And thank you so very much.
Oh, thank you so much, Yolanda and Vanessa. The honor has been all mine, and I would leave your audience just probably with a couple of thoughts. One, anyone out there, we talked about the healing team briefly before, but just know anybody out there can create a healing team. Find some trusted people that won't pass judgment, who you can share what may be some of the deepest, darkest secrets that you have never felt comfortable talking about before. So it can be done very, very easily. And just remember, you are the captain of your own healing team. And so it's so important to remember that there are so many people around you who care for you and love you. And it's just like putting a team together. I'm a big baseball fan. And so, every team needs a captain. And so, you are the captain of your healing team. And as we like to say on the podcast, you're not alone. Everybody's journey is different. It's like a fingerprint. Each is unique, but there is somebody out there who is going through or has gone through something similar. And so you never know, by speaking up about your own story, who you might touch. And I'll just close it with, the tagline that I use on our show, which is, it's perfectly okay to not always be okay.
Okay. That's right.
With that being said, I want to thank you one more time, Erik, for joining us and telling us about your podcast and your story as well.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I really appreciate it.
And to those of you who are watching and listening, please don't forget to follow us on our social media outlets. Please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button, as we don't want you to miss out on any of our great topics or great guests. I want to thank you all for tuning in, and we will talk to you all later.